Going to be the important part of this meeting today is to get your feedback about how we can improve the things that we need to work on for our campus. So first, I do have the privilege of introducing our Chancellor, Mr. Kim Wilcox.
Well, thanks, Madam President. Great to be here, and I only have a couple things I want to say. First, thanks. Thanks for the participation in the survey itself. We had a very good, high level of participation, and no surveys of any value if people don't actually fill it out. So thanks for that, and thanks for being here today. I appreciate the way that Julie and the group have set up the day. I think it's wise. It's not just a presentation, but it's a work session. So I'd ask you to think of the survey results in this way. Don't think of them as a report card. Remember report cards, you go through the 6 weeks of the semester and you get your report card and you go home and show mom and dad. And the report card was simply a record of what you had done. Okay, it's done now. You took the test, you wrote the paper, it's done. Okay. Instead, I'd ask you to think of these survey results as advice about our future. So yes, they describe us and they measure us at a point in time, but I think their greatest value is not describing what we've done, but their greatest value is in helping us think about what we might do. And there's a lot of information there for that kind of conversation. I've had the opportunity to preview the results. Actually, the vice chancellors have discussed them in part. The deans and the vice chancellors have discussed them in part. So now the bigger group is important as we think about what to do with this. And there's lots of things to celebrate in the report. We do very well in our collective sense, in a sense of participation. Our supervisors get high marks for respected employees. We get high marks for our sense of commitment to each other and our diversity and inclusion. But there's some places where we can do better as we think about the forward as much as the past. And one of those is change. There's some items in the report I'm sure you're going to go through about organizational change. It's a place that we don't do very well on. We, our colleagues, don't feel we've done very well at managing change. But the survey talks about UC system change. And I'm not sure when I read the results, and I've looked at them a couple times, how much that reflects system-wide things like UC Path, and some have offered that wasn't handled as well as it might. How much that reflects campus-wide things. I'm not trying to pick on IT, but these examples like Banner, and to the extent to which that was something, or to the extent to which there's something in a particular unit that wasn't handled well. I think there's probably for each one of us, we could argue yes or no to any one of those different pieces. So as you spend the rest of the time here this afternoon looking at the results, I'd appreciate your advice on some of those kinds of distinctions, where the challenges were for you personally and where the opportunities are for us collectively to move ahead. Again, in this mindset of not a report card, but advice to the future. I want to do a few shout outs, of course, to Julie and the group, to Ron Coley, who's down here, to Jadie. One of the places that we score fairly well on is our investment in employee development. High participation marks and good responses there. That's a credit to all those people who have invested so much, and I think your presence here today is another one of those indicators. And I appreciate that very much, because without our commitment to each other, we all start to fail. And while there are some things in the survey results that are disappointing to me personally, I am heartened by the fact that we've laid the groundwork to work at them in a very respectful and positive way. So thanks for your participation in the survey. Thanks a lot for your participation today. I wish I could stay and be part of the discussions, but I'm going to get lots of reports back from all my colleagues. So thank you.
So next we do have the Associate Vice Chancellor of Human Resources, Jadie Lee. This event is actually hosted by Staff Assembly and Human Resources. So Ms. Jadie Lee.
we got tons of good information, but I think what's going to be important is what we do with that information and how we use it to figure out our next steps. So thank you very much for coming. I want to say a few words about the engagement survey itself. This is something that UC decided to do in collaboration with the UC Council of Staff Assemblies back in 2012. And when they did that, they were thinking about ways in which we could get information that would help UC to better understand the employee experience and all aspects of that employee experience, from career development to performance management to what it's like every day, how you interact with people at work. And so UC partnered with an organization called Towers Watson, and they keep adding other partners, so now I think it's Towers Watson Willis. But they partnered with an organization that could conduct a survey for us to really get at these issues. And part of that was because this is a company that has international experience in this area, but also because by partnering with an external firm, we could ensure that employees would have confidence that they could be very frank in responding to the survey and that they could say things in confidence. Because what UC gets back are numerical responses to the questions that were asked, and then Towers Watson Willis takes the comments that are provided and identifies the themes that are relevant both across the system and then for each location. So with that information, then employees' voices are being heard collectively and communicated to both the system and then to each individual campus. So what we're going to go through today, as soon as I pull up my presentation, is first is a presentation that is a combination of the results at a system-wide level so that you can see how your colleagues throughout the system reacted to the survey, and then also our campus-specific results. I've also included some information from the last survey. I wasn't involved in the 2012 survey, don't have a lot of information about what happened with that. My understanding is the campus didn't do very much with the results in 2012, so the next survey was in 2015, and we had Staff Assembly and HR hosted a webinar back in 2016 where we shared those results, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened since then. But then we're really going to dig into today's results and then talk about, have you identify the ideas that you have for how we can respond to some of the things that we're seeing. So with that said, let me start up this presentation. So that's what I just talked about. We'll skip that slide. So here's the background. It was a 4-week survey, or a survey that was administered for 4 weeks earlier in 2016. Across the system, we had about a 51% response rate, which as surveys go is pretty good. There were a total of 10,000 employees across the system who responded, a little over 10,000. And the way that the survey is structured, there are 40 questions in 10 different survey areas, and we'll go through, you'll see the results from each of those survey areas. So let's go through our results. Okay. So one of the first questions is, what do we mean when we talk about engagement? What is it we're trying to measure? And so this is the definition that Towers Watson Willis is using when they build an engagement survey. So they're trying to look at the extent to which a staff member feels connected to the organization, because if they feel that connection, they're more likely to stay, they're motivated to do their best work, and they have the tools that they need to deliver and maintain their level of contribution over time. So that's the starting point. That's the ideal state. That's what we want for everybody. And the survey tries to measure the extent to which we're meeting that. So I thought that might be helpful to bear in mind as we go through the results. All right, so here are the headlines from the system-wide survey. The first thing is that the rates, participation rates improved. So this is a pulse survey. It doesn't go to everybody. It goes to a representative sample of non-represented staff each time the survey is administered. So some of you would have received a survey, others would not. And then next time around, it will be a different sample of people from across the system. But people who study surveys have determined that the sample size is such that it gives us results that are that we can rely on. So overall, the system-wide response rate improved, and so did ours as a campus. And what we see across the system is that there is improvement in many of the areas that are being surveyed, but the entire UC system is challenged in terms of managing change, and that came through at pretty much every location. When you break down, remember that previous slide showed you that there were 40 questions across 10 subject areas. When you break those down, what you see is that system-wide, of those 40, we had improvement in 17 and a decline in 6. When you look specifically at UCR, we had improvement in 22 items, so lots of improvement across the board. And we had 12 areas where we had declines, so some significant declines too. So we're going to dig into all of those. Across the system, the areas of improvement have been around the way we communicate, around performance management, supervision, working relationships, and the extent to which employees feel engaged. And then when you look at UCR specifically, which I think is what we're really interested in today, the improvements have been in communication, career development, performance management, and supervision. But what you'll see is there are two sets of comparators. There's UCR's results as we compare to the rest of the system, and then as we compare to employees across the US. And so when you see on this slide the reference to external benchmarks, that external benchmark is all of the employees that Towers Watson Willis surveys across all kinds of organizations in the US. So when you look at that, the system-wide strengths that UC has are the quality of supervision, working relationships, diversity and inclusion, in particular around support for equal opportunity, and engagement. When you look at UCR, what we see as the areas that our employees have identified as strengths are the working relationships that they have within their departments, the quality of supervision, and this in particular was focused on the time that's allowed for training and development, the extent to which supervisors treat staff with respect, the extent to which supervisors listen to different perspectives, diversity and inclusion, and in particular, again, support for equal employment opportunity, and engagement. And employees at UCR are typically proud to be associated with UC. So that's kind of the high-level improvements over the last survey. So the flip side of that, the areas where what employees across the system told us we have opportunities to improve in, the biggest single issue is organizational change. And when you look at what's declined since 2015, that's really where the decline is. There's a little bit of a decline across the system in terms of how people see the UC brand. And then when you look at UCR in particular, we see exactly the same thing. The biggest decline has been, the place where we have the most opportunity for improvement has been around organizational change. And then some I think the score's slightly lower in terms of the image of UCR. So we'll get into the specific results now. And the first thing I wanted to show you is when you look at each of the categories that the survey measures, this kind of gives you a snapshot of the University of California. Now, this is overall, this is not UCR, but you can see that the areas of strength that you see here are the quality of supervision, communication, and performance management. That's where we've seen some growth over the last few years. But when you look at national norms, you'll see that even though we've made some improvement, we're still lagging in lots of areas, and change management in particular is one that continues to be a challenge. And then this one, which again may be a little bit small for you to see up here, but I wanted to have it in the slide deck so that you have it available if you'd like to look at it in more detail when you're at your desk. What this one shows across the top is each UC location. And then down the side are the categories that we surveyed on. And so even if you can't read the fine print, what you can see is that there is one line where 6 of the locations have a red box. So most locations have a red box, and that is the organizational change. So Again, you can dig into it and look and see that, at some campuses, it seemed to go slightly better. I think there is one location that, well, two locations that have a positive number. Every other UC location has a negative number in terms of organizational change. The two that are positive, if you're interested, are agricultural and natural resources and the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So what that tells us is every campus had challenges with organizational change during this period of time. And then if you look at the line immediately under that, you'll see that there is a line where there are 5 green boxes, and that tells us that across the system, we've seen fairly consistent improvement in the area of performance management. So that's the kind of, you can take a look at that at your leisure and see how we compare to the rest of the system. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you is where we were in 2015 when we last had this discussion. So in 2015, the things that our campus, so now we're talking just about UCR data. So the things that you identified on our campus as working well were the working relationships that we have on our campus. And in particular, the communication between our own department and the other departments on campus that we needed to do business with, but also between staff in our own department. So that was working really well for us. The numbers that you'll see over on the right are the changes from 2015. So what we see is that we're not working quite as well across departments, at least that's people's perceptions, but the communication and cooperation between staff within departments is even higher than it was, and it was already high a couple of years ago. And then the other area that you'll see that was working really well a couple of years ago was around communication. People felt that they were open, they could communicate openly and honestly with their supervisors and with other leaders, and that has continued to grow at UCR. So you'll see that that increased by 6 points. And the areas of opportunity 2 years ago when we last did this, this is what was identified, staffing and workload. That was the number one area of opportunity 2 years ago. People were asked the question, we're asked to respond to a statement, there's usually sufficient staff in my department to handle the workload. And what we heard last time around was that people mostly did not agree with that statement. That has become even more extreme this time around, and we've had a decline of 5 points in that area. So that clearly is an area that continues to be a concern for lots of us. Another area that was an opportunity for improvement 2 years ago was around performance management, and there were 2 questions that came up here. One was, I feel my campus does a good job matching pay to performance, and the second one was, I feel my personal contributions are recognized. We've made significant improvements as a campus in this area, and those of you who've been around for a few years will know that we've had some changes in our performance management process. I think, there's some concerns about the new processes, but in terms of responding to these questions, what we saw was a 5 percentage point increase in the responses to the question, we do a good job matching pay to performance, and an 11% increase in employees believing that their personal contributions are recognized over where we were a couple of years ago. In terms of career development, 2 years ago, staff identified that the campus, an area that we needed to improve was providing people with the necessary information and resources to manage their careers, and then additional opportunities for employees to receive training to improve their skills. We've made some improvements here too over the last couple of years. And then the other area of opportunity for improvement 2 years ago was around communication. And 2 years ago, when asked the question, my campus does an excellent job of keeping employees informed about important organizational matters, employees responded that we did not do so well there, and our score has continued to decrease in that area. So that's just a summary of where we were 2 years ago. And so now with that, let's go through our results. The way I've organized them is by categories. So recall that there were 40 questions arranged into categories. So I'll give you the highlights of each category, and then you can see kind of where we're going. This first slide gives you the overall results, and it's compared to 2 things. One is where we were in 2015, and then the other one is where we are compared to national norms. So as I just mentioned, you'll see that we've improved, and the areas where we have most improved have been supervision, career development, and performance management. Again, there's still more work we could do in those areas, but what you're telling us is these are the areas that we've seen most improvement. But we have seen significant declines in terms of organizational change and a lesser decline in terms of how staff perceive the image of the campus. Our engagement score overall, so that's a score out of 100, is at 66, which is where it was 2 years ago, but some things have gone up and some have come down, so the scores remained in the same place. And then on the right of that slide, you'll see our results when compared to national norms. And you'll see that this is consistent with the rest of UC. Recall that slide earlier on that I showed you that showed that when you compare UC to national norms for employees, our employees tend to measure lower on all of the measures of engagement. The one exception for us was our working relationships that we have with each other. And that continued to be a strong point for the campus. Okay, so now Towers Watson Willis very kindly identifies for us our top strengths. And so you'll see here, this is where you'll start seeing the changes over the last time around. The strengths really around, if you look at the green boxes, the white stars mean that the change is statistically significant. So when you look at the top half of that, you'll see that we made statistically significant changes over the last couple of years in the areas of supervisors making time to allow employees to participate in training and development, employees believing their personal contributions are recognized, and staff feeling confident that they can achieve their career objectives at UC. And then if you look over on the far right-hand side, what you see is the comparisons to the national norms. So staff here feel significantly more positive that their supervisors allow them to participate in training and development. And while we've made a lot of improvements in terms of staff feeling their personal contributions are recognized, we're still lagging the national norm there in a way that, because it's got a star next to it, tells us is statistically significant. The bottom half of that slide is opportunities, and what you'll see that's really striking to me is that all three of these have to do with change. So I'm not sure if you can read the small print, but the first one is organizational changes have been executed well. The second one is that changes have been explained well. And the third is that they've been planned well. And you can see that employees' responses were less positive this time around than they were 2 years ago. And you'll see by the abundance of little white stars that all of those were statistically significant. And when you compare us to the UC overall scores in the middle and then to the US national norms, you'll see that this area of change management is one that employees really felt was the area of greatest opportunity for the campus. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one. It gives us essentially the same data, but formatted slightly differently. These are the highest and lowest scoring items. But again, you'll have copies of this, so you can dig into it as much as you would like. And I'll take you to the next slide, which is the categories, the overall categories, because these are the categories that the survey measures. They're arranged alphabetically except for the last two, and the reason those two are at the bottom is because they are brand new categories that were added this year. So what you'll see is the first category is career development. You see that we have made an improvement in terms of your perceptions of the opportunities for career development at UCR over 2015. We're lagging the University of California a little bit. So that's the pale pink box in the middle. And then when you look over on the right, we're lagging the US national norm, and that is in a fairly significant way because it's in bold and it's got the little asterisk next to it. So this gives you the summary on each factor. What I'm going to do is go through each one of these and show you the questions that go into each element or each category. So the first one is career development. And I don't intend to go through each one on each slide, but you can see the data here, and perhaps I can just hit the highlights. So in this one, the areas that are dark green mean that these were statistically significant. And so what we saw in terms of career development over the last couple of years is that employees feel confident, more confident than they did in the past, that they can achieve their career objectives at UCR. And we're doing a better job than we did in the past at providing them with the resources that they need to be able to manage their careers. But when you look at the next two columns, you see overall and the national norm, then you can see that we still have some ways to go, but we're making progress in those directions. And that's going to be the format for every one of the areas, so you can see how we're making progress. The one where we have lost some ground over 2015, and you can see that from the pinkish red box, is the response to the statement, I believe I have the opportunity for personal development and growth within the UC system. So that was kind of an interesting finding, that we think we can achieve our personal career objectives, but we're less sure that we have the opportunity for personal development and growth. So that's kind of the format that we'll go through with each one of the topic areas. So that's career development. I think the big thing to look at is the boxes are generally green, which suggests that we're moving in the right direction from where we started. Okay, so the next one then is communication. And what you see here is that overall, that top line, we have a little green box. So we've made some slight improvements here. But then there are just two questions that make up this category. One of them we did pretty well on, the other one we lost some ground over the last time around. And so the one that we lost ground on was the extent to which the campus does a good job of keeping employees informed about important organizational matters. And what you told us was that we're doing a less good job now than we did a couple of years ago. Now, when you look at the system, across the system, you see that that's true at every UC location. And when you look at the national norms, you see that that's true across all organizations. But that's what our data tells us. And then the second part of communication was around feeling able to openly and honestly communicate to my supervisor and to other leaders. And it looks like we made some significant progress there. Still lagging the system-wide overall score a little bit, and still lagging national norms. All right. The next area is engagement. And so looking at this, what you see is that we have some pretty high scores in some areas. So if you look around the middle, then I don't know if you'll be able to see that number 19, but the question there, or the statement is, I feel motivated to go beyond my formal responsibilities to get the job done. And we had 83% of the employees who responded agreed with that statement. So that is more even than a couple of years ago, and so that's an area that I wanted to highlight. Similarly, question 27, the statement, I would recommend UC as a good place to work. 82% of our employees said that. That's higher than it was here 2 years ago. It's higher than the rest of the system. It's higher than most employers in the country. So that's something to point out. Fewer people said that they were seriously considering leaving UC now than they did a couple of years ago. We were exactly level with the rest of the system in that category, but lagging national norms a little bit. The areas where we had seen the greatest regression in this area are around staffing. And only when asked to respond to the question or the statement, there's usually sufficient staff in my department to handle the workload. Only 30% of the employees who responded agreed with that statement. And so that is worse than last year or last time around, and lags the UC-wide responses and also national norms there. Moving on to image, you'll see here that the percentage of employees who said they were proud to be associated with the UC system stayed the same at 88%, which is pretty darn high, higher than the rest of UC, higher than the national norm. But we lost some ground in terms of employees responding to this question. My campus is highly regarded by its employees. 54% of you agreed with that. So the next area was organizational change. We've talked about these results. You see they're bright red boxes with little white stars across the board in terms of organizational change. Employees at our campus responded, very few of them felt that changes had been planned well, explained well, or executed well, and we responded more negatively than employees across the UC system as a whole, and also more negatively than is typically the case in the national norms. So we know we have work to do there, and we'll chat more about that. The next area was around performance management. And again, we see some significant increases. We talked about these in terms of feeling that our personal contributions are recognized and the extent to which people believe the campus does a good job of matching paper to performance. This is an area where we saw some increase, but our total favorable response rate is still very low, and so we know that we have work to do there. And then, in response to the question, I think my performance on the job is evaluated fairly. 65% of employees agreed with that statement, but that was fewer than had done so in 2015. And again, when you look at these categories of performance management, we're doing better as a campus than we did a couple of years ago. But when you compare to the UC overall and then the national norms, we have some work to do. The last area, not quite at the last area, next to last, I want to be careful with our time because I want to leave time for you to discuss the results, is around supervision. And I think when you look at the first set of green boxes, that first column, this is the change since 2015 in how we feel at UCR about our supervisors and the way in which our supervisors interact with us. And I think this tells a really wonderful story in terms of the changes that have been made. If you look at question 17, which is the first dark green box, that question, for those of you who can't read it, is, my supervisor treats me with respect. And 88% of our respondents agreed with that statement. That was a 7% increase over the last time around. The box immediately above it, I have a clear understanding of how my job contributes to the departmental objectives. 89% of employees agreed with that statement, which is the same number as a couple of years ago, but is a very high number. So pretty pleased with that. And then there's another dark green box, and the question here is, indicate the extent to which you agree with a series of statements about supervisors. So effectively, listens carefully to different points of view before coming to conclusions. That was another area where it seems like our supervisors have made some improvements. Again, there's still some work to do, but moving in a really good direction there. And then this is the one more question in supervision, and this is around supervisors helping employees to participate in training and development. We've seen a big increase, 9 percentage points increase there, and we lead the UC system and the national norms in that area. So really gratifying change there. Next quality is around is around working relationships. We already talked about this one a little bit. We see some reduction in cooperation across departments, but cooperation between staff and departments, this is a number that continues to increase, and we're leading both UC and national norms here. In terms of diversity and inclusion, you'll see that there are no scores from prior years because this was a new category. It wasn't initially included in the surveys. But we are leading the UC system in response to the statement that the campus supports equal opportunity for all employees. And so that's the green box that you see. Now, the red box that you see is in response to the statement, employees are treated with dignity and respect regardless of their position and background. And what we saw there was that we are close to the system-wide norm, but lagging national norms. And then the final category, again, a new category for this time around, wellness. And so we don't have a benchmark to compare it to from the past, but in terms of overall, we've scored higher in this area than other locations. There aren't national norms for some of the questions in this category. And then in the final one, the national norm, we're lagging that slightly. And that question, or that statement was, my organization promotes an environment of physical, mental, and social well-being. So we're leading the UC system, we're getting closer to the national norm there. So with that, that's a quick summary of the data that we got from the survey. There are more slides in this slide deck, but I don't want to take the time to go through them with you now, because I really think it would be more helpful for you if we start talking about what we can do in response to these results. But the other slides, if you have a chance to take a look at the deck on your own, break the data down further by role. So we have them broken down in lots of different ways. So does it look different depending on what your role is in the organization, whether you're an individual contributor or a supervisor? Does it look different for depending on your age, or how many years of service you have, or your gender or ethnicity? So we've broken it down in all of those ways, and I encourage you to take a look at it. But for now, I'm going to close by turning it over to Ross. Thank you very much.
Okay, first things first. Hi, I'm Ross French. I'm the Vice President / President-elect Staff Assembly and the Digital Communications Coordinator at the UCR School of Medicine. We were discussing how we wanted to present this information, and we decided as a group that we thought it would be worthwhile to have a Q&A, but we didn't want to just put one poor person up here to receive everything. So we decided to have a panel discussion. Obviously, Vice Chancellor Lee is here, but we're also going to bring up Alex Nahara, who is Employee Labor Relations Analyst from HR, and he's been very, very involved, so go ahead and come on up. Julie Salgado, the current Staff Assembly President, and Robert Wolfer, who is the past president twice of the UCR Staff Assembly and who's been on the board for 6 years, which has got to be some sort of record. And then finally, Kimberly Villanueva, who's the Interim Director of Strategic Project Management and a member of the Planning Committee for the Organizational Excellence Group. So, my first question for the board, because I get to ask the first question. There's a lot of good, and there's a lot of bad-ish, nothing that's awful in this survey, but there's a lot of room for opportunity for improvement. But I'm curious from your standpoint, and this is especially for Alex and Jadie, how much of this do you feel is endemic to higher education as a whole? Things that aren't unique to UC Riverside or even the University of California but that are part of working in higher ed. And you get one mic, so you have to share. Hopefully it's turned on. Is it turned on?
Is it? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start off, but then I'm going to defer to Alex on this. So that is in part, I think, the value of having a survey like this, because it shows us how our data compares to other campuses within UC. So for all of, that's why I put up that chart that shows you the scores for every single location, so that you can be the judge of how similar or different we are from the rest of the campuses in the UC system. We don't have really good data on how we compare to other non-UC campuses. There is a comparator group that is universities, but it's a very small group, and some are small private universities, and it's difficult to really match apples to apples because, we are the biggest and the best research system. So that's why I think it's helpful for us to look at the national norms across all industries, but it doesn't answer that question of how we do compared to other universities. But fortunately, I think Alex has some insights into this.
Thank you, Jadie. So I think what Jadie is alluding to is I've participated in a TIA national leadership program that pulled HR professionals and leaders from across the country and higher educational institutions, and that included Harvard, Brown, University of Florida, Tennessee, and across the country. And there were about 27 different campuses, private, public, research, non-research institutions. And the issue, there were two key themes that kept coming up in over a 2-year program. One was just the enormous amount of change that they felt was occurring, even at the smallest of college campuses, as they were coming up to speed on IT developments, as they were developing career tracks or comparable systems. University of Iowa, University of Missouri systems were doing similar things. And then the second interesting challenge they had was finding ways to collaborate effectively with faculty and change. And I think as staff, we see that. And it's, you know, a lot of the workload that we talk about and how it's increasing and how it's impacting our sense of work-life balance is increased somewhat by the additional faculty, which is at the core of the work we do. And so how do we harness that important aspect of our work and implement it into our lives in a way that is balanced and moving the university forward? And I will tell you, from the Harvards of the world to the small private schools, we were all struggling with that. And that group has developed a sort of a focus group that's going to develop white papers on that to tackle some of those very issues. So, you know, it's anecdotal, but I'd be happy to share some of the comments and the institutions that participated in that and give you the details and information I had.
Anybody else want to comment? No? Okay. Do we have any questions? Raise your hand. All right, we have one right up front if one of you can see who gets there first. I know who you are, but you might want to go ahead and stand up and introduce yourself.
Kristina Gonzales from the School of Medicine, and I was just wondering if this was broken down by school, individual departments at UCR, and if not, why that wasn't considered so that we can work on the individual unit. And
So I think this goes back to the original decisions that were made in 2011, 2012 for the first survey. And the CUCSA and UC's System-Wide Employee Relations Office were trying to come up with the right balance of getting information that would be useful and helpful to campuses and giving employees confidence that they could not be identified in any way. And so ultimately the design of the survey is that it doesn't get broken down and provided to campuses at a level beyond the campus. So we have aggregate data for the campus, but we don't have it broken down. And if you think about it, we had about 400, I don't remember the number, it's on that first slide, but between 400 and 500 employees who participated in the survey, because it's a pulse survey. It doesn't go to everybody, it goes to a representative sample. If you start then breaking that down further, then it becomes easier to try and figure out who said what, and employees don't feel quite as comfortable with the anonymous nature of the surveys. So the decision was made that part of the value of the survey would be that we would be identifying broad themes across UC and then across campuses, but it doesn't break it down beyond that. And so and we've had a lot of discussion about this because employees have asked this question, and I took the question to a system-wide group of my counterparts and the employee relations staff from the Office of the President to ask about this, and they felt that there were other ways that campuses had of getting at specific issues in individual units, but that the purpose of this survey was to inform our understanding of campus-wide themes and issues that we could work on that would have impact across all organizational units on the campus, which, you know, is a little frustrating if you want that level of granularity about your organization. But in terms of figuring out where we can do things that will do the most good for the entire campus, I think that's what the survey is trying to do for us.
And then also, so other orgs like BASS, so Mr. Roncoli, we do have an extra one that he does, a climate survey. So there are times that your organizations can also include a different survey, and then we kind of do see kind of the same results when we do both surveys. So I know, and then there's also a cost. If we were to survey everyone, there is a cost to the survey as well.
Just for a show of hands, how many people feel completely comfortable being completely honest in a survey where they know they're going to be identified? Raise your hand. Any questions? Raise your hand. Margine right up front, and then we'll go here. So we'll go right here and then right here.
Hi, everyone.
You're on.
I'm on. Hi. Margine from University Communications. Communications, a recurring theme, and we have known about this for some time. Been trying to work with Jadie and others, Ron, to try to unlock this puzzle. I think that there are several factors. I think part of the issue is the volume of change and trying to find ways to communicate this. I think part of the issue is that the landscape for communications is unbelievably complicated and complex. There's clearly more opportunity for us to work with many folks to do some additional research on all of this as we begin to go through an integrated marketing brand refresh in the coming months. If it's similar to what we've done in past years, there is definitely going to be a campus component to that. So I think there'll be opportunity to drill down a little bit further about that and about how people prefer to receive communications, that kind of thing. But I have a related question, which is, to me, one of the frustrations is trying to tease out the difference between interpersonal communications and organizational communications, for lack of a better distinction. Does the survey provide any additional detail? If not, do you have particular thoughts about that, or any even anecdotal feedback that would give us a little bit of a sense of how we can maybe improve in those areas?
So I don't think, I mean, when you look at the survey, it's, let's see, slide 21, if you have it available. There are only 2 questions that employees were asked that fell into the category of communication, and one was, the campus does an excellent job of keeping employees informed. So that's the communication from the campus to employees. And that's where we along with that we seem to have lost ground. And then the other one was the interpersonal, the individual communication. And that one appears to be an area of strength for us. So that's as much detail as we have. Now, when you go through the rest of the presentation, the slides that I didn't cover, you can break it down. And I think one of the things that might be interesting to look at for this, for example, would be when you look at communication by where people sit within the organization. Because then you can take a look and see, do directors feel well informed, but individual contributors don't? And can we use that data to try and tease out, where's the communication breakdown happening? Is it that the chancellor's telling all of his direct reports, but it's not getting to individual managers and supervisors? Or is it that it's getting to the managers and supervisors, but they're not communicating to individual employees? And so I think we can use the data when we break it down that way, and you'll have access to that.
Anybody else? I think it's worth noting that if you look on campus, especially in the last 3 months, there's been substantial efforts made both in the University Communications Office and Advancement in Integrated Technologies to improve our campus communications. I think you'll agree the digest is vastly better than it was. The new R Space portal, vastly better than it was. But one question I want to throw out to you all regarding that is, how much obligation is there for an employee to make sure that they are engaged, that they are paying attention, that they are seeking out information versus passively receiving it? Anybody want to comment on that?
It is on, right? Okay. I would say that that's a very key point, because when we had, last November, we had the Organizational Excellence event for change management, and we had Shola Richards as a guest speaker. A major part of our conversation at that event was kind of your own need to take charge of the change that's happening to you. It's very important for you, if there's change coming down the pipeline, for you to ask questions about it, for you to sit there and think about, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my team? How would this affect other people I work with that are not in my team, maybe cross-departmentally, and really take an assessment of the proposed changes that are coming down the pipeline. And really, you need to go out and look and ask the questions to the right people, because that's how you feel empowered with change. And not to be shameless plugging for OE or anything, but it is really important, because the more active you are in your own engagement and your own empowerment and your own ability to communicate up to those people above you who are telling you there's this long list of changes coming down, the more effective you're going to be in understanding the change and being able to manage that change for yourself. And now I am going to do a shameless plug just because I'm speaking on it. At your tables, there's a flyer here. Take a look at it. We are hosting in February on the 28th an event at the Alumni Visitor Center house. Sorry. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Employee Survival Guide to Change book. It was a book that was given out at our OE event, and in that session, we're going to have an interactive learning session where we learn how to identify what the barriers to change are. So what are your personal barriers to change? We're going to work through some scenarios. You're going to learn how to identify those barriers, and you'll learn how to assess what type of support is needed to overcome those barriers, either for yourself or for your team. And then we're also going to have access to some tools and templates and resources for you to take back to your desk to either assess yourself or help assess your team. So just on that point, I just want to say it is very, very important for people to actively look for the questions and their concerns, and then have questions asked about them so that you feel more comfortable.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
So I think there are many ways that you could get engaged and become involved, and I think that is an individual responsibility we all bear. And I'm not so concerned about the how, because I think there are many ways. We provide many opportunities, but the why. And in my line of work with employee and labor relations specifically, we are involved with employees who spend, all of us I think can attest to, most of our day here. This is and constitutes a large part of our life, our waking day. And so, when I think of should I get engaged, should I get involved, what level of involvement, I share people, engagement equals empowerment and a sense of ownership. And if at least half of your life, and I think for some of us more, is spent here, do we want to live a life that is passive and things are done to us? Or do we want to engage and put a different direction in our world? Because if I am going to commit myself to this location, which I am, if I'm going to engage professionally and personally to wanting to know each of you, because you are an extension of my family, then I should want to shape that. And if we're not willing to do that, I think what we're doing is a disservice to ourselves. And that doesn't mean you join a work group. It doesn't mean you're teaching classes. It does mean that you are contributing in whatever way you can. And I think that's just for our individual benefit. And if we take care of that, we will see that tide will raise a lot of these other factors. So it's my personal why on that.
Ross, I don't know if you wanted to share about Lot 10, 13, how that kind of, like Kim was saying, how you have to voice if you do see something in
Sure.
the podcast.
Any of you park in Lot 10, Lot 13? How many of you saw the barricades that went up? How many of you were frustrated by the barricades that went up? That was done because of a safety issue, and it was a solution that was come up with in all good faith that, hey, there's an issue. We need to fix that. And they did that first. I was with you. I was not a big fan of them, but did anybody sign the petition? Anybody in here? One person. Okay, cool. Thank you, Cherie. I put together a petition, not because I wanted to change the world, but because I wanted to know if I was alone in this. So I put together this petition. It got a bunch of signatures. I took it to Vice Chancellor Coley. We had a meeting with him and Irma and many of the TAPS folks. And they said, yeah, you know what? These people are right. So we're going to change it. So it's a great example. I've had people come up to me afterwards and go, you won. I'm like, no, I didn't win. This isn't about Ross. This is about the fact that we saw something. We said, hey, this would be, we get it, but we should probably do something differently. And the administration listened. It's a great success story. So, and let me just publicly say thank you. All right. You waited very patiently. Go ahead.
I'm Amber Nicholson, and I work in undergraduate education. This question kind of moves backwards a little bit. It piggybacks off of Kristina's question, and I'm just curious to know what the system's decision was in using a representative sample in doing the survey and not making the survey available to the staff as a whole.
So after 6 years, that question has been asked many, many times. As president of Staff Assembly, you are you're on the CUCSA committee as one of the delegates. So when I first started, I had no idea there was something called the engagement survey, and then it was presented to us. So was the very first one. I immediately asked that question: why are we doing a pulse survey and not surveying everybody? 2 responses we got, and one I buy, one I don't buy. Right, the one I buy is statistically relevant. That's the one that I will say, okay, I agree. The one I don't buy is they say it costs more money to do a full survey. I'm an IT guy. Doesn't make any sense to me that you can't put all the names in there versus some of the names in there. But over the last 6 years, we continue to ask that question. I know that even as recent as last year, we brought it up and said, why are we not doing this? And the party line answer is it costs more money, and that they feel that it is that statistically relevant piece of it. So I hope that answers your question as to why, but we do keep asking the question. So.
Okay, we have Charlie in the back right there, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Scruggs in the Health Professions Advising Center on campus, and my role is primarily to work with undergraduate students. In regards to one of the survey questions, which I actually was not one of those people that was able to take the survey, the results seems to be an overarching theme regarding staff feeling that they don't have enough resources to complete their work, or that we were working way beyond our time frame, our hours here. One of the things that I wanted to know is when staff was completing the survey, if it looked at the type of work that they're doing, if they're working with students per se, or if they're working maybe in a like a business aspect, processing, that type of thing. I asked this because this past summer, I and a couple of people in this room participated in Ron Coley's Lean Thinking Book Club, which I took a lot out of that. And I'll have to say at first, when I joined the book club, I was trying to think about how some of the examples in the book would work to higher education. I'm one of those people that thought, oh, this isn't going to work. But after we participated in the club, there are some key things that I took out of there. One about processing waste, that type of thing. So getting back onto my question, in the survey and looking at where respondents said that they were overextended, did anybody look at the work that they were doing? When you're doing processes and that type of thing, I think there's a lot of ways that you can be more lean. But when you are working with students, especially first-generation students, the campus is really putting a move to continue to be diverse and welcoming all students and work with them. That does create more work for people who work directly with students. And so I wanted to know, has that been looked at? I know with the performance evaluation, we're looking at quality, not necessarily quantity. So I just kind of wanted to know if we could talk a little bit more about that, or if that's really sort of been dug a little bit deeper so we can find out why people are really truly saying they have more work and what that looks like and how we're able to actually tackle that.
Thank you for that question, because I think you asked a question that a lot of people have wanted to ask. And in response to the question, I had to put my glasses on, so it was a dead giveaway. I was looking through the survey results to see how much breakdown we have. So we have it broken down not to what's the population that you work with or the type of work that you do, but we do have the breakdowns by role within the organization. And so one that, as you asked that question, so that just to recap, the question was about staffing levels and having sufficient staff to get the work done. And then you made some good comments about the quality of the work, not just the quantity, especially when you work with students. That's really critical. But so I went back and looked at the survey, and that question was number 2. It was a question that is that rolls up into the engagement category. So I looked at that and then looked at how we have that broken down. We can break it down by role, but not by the type of work. So I looked at, and this is slide, if you want to look at it, 31. And so when you look at engagement by role, it breaks it down by individual contributor, supervisor, manager, and director and above. And what we see is that employees who are individual contributors or supervisors responded differently to this question than employees at higher levels. So that's about as much granularity as I can get from the way that the data has been provided. I did make a note of the question. I'm going to see if I can, look at it any other way, but that seems to be about where I can find. That's about as much detail as I can get about it.
Anybody else?
Unless there's an extra survey like Mr. Roncoli's survey where he knows exactly where these areas are coming from, so he can go to like Andy and say, hey, Andy, why are your folks feeling this way? So that's why those extra, I'm not feeling that way, Andy. I'm not
Andy, why are your people so happy?
So that's where the other surveys, that other orgs can ask those questions, and then they know exactly where they're coming from.
Right here.
Melissa C. Haver from undergraduate education. I know that one of the areas that we were in need of more improvement was continually mentioned to be change management. But at the same time, I feel that during that period of time, we were going through UC Path and looking towards UC Path, and that was a monumental change that doesn't happen all the time. As a matter of fact, that was 35 years after PPS that we changed to, or started changing to UC Path. So theoretically, I mean, something that big may not happen for a really long time. How do we take that into consideration when we're looking at a deficiency that could be very much influenced by such a huge but not everyday change?
So I think that's where the value of having a survey every couple of years comes in, because we can look at trends across time. And what we can see is that employees have consistently felt on our campus that we didn't do a very good job of managing change. It's worse now than it was 2 years ago. Whether that reflects UC Path and all the change, just the massive amount of change that has brought, we'll know in 2 years' time when we do this again. We'll be able to see, was that, was it in part a response to the unusually high amount of change that's going on? So I think it speaks to, my appreciation that we've decided as a system to keep surveying every couple of years and measure our progress. But I don't have a way for articulating, was it one particular thing? I will say, though, remember at the beginning when I said part of what Towers Watson Willis did was to take all of the individual comments and identify themes. When we look at those comments, or not the comments themselves because we don't have those, but when we look at the themes that Towers Watson Willis identified, they didn't say it was specifically to Path. They said it was the volume of changes, the number of changes, the variety of changes at UCR was something that employees felt that the campus wasn't doing as good a job as it needed to. So I think that's helpful. I think if it had just been UC Path, then that would have come through as one of the themes in the comments. So it seems as if there's a larger issue around change on our campus. Robert.
I also want to point out, and this again comes from a historical standpoint over the last 6 years of the 3 surveys that we've done. If you look at that question, there's only, it's a 3-part question, 15A, B, and C. 15B is really the only part of this that we at UCR may actually be able to control. If you look at that question, it actually says changes across the UC system. And at the Cooksville level, we looked at the wording for that actual question over time. Do we leave in UC system? Is it confusing? Do we take it out? One of the things that we discussed and we decided upon is we leave it in to make it consistent from survey to survey, 12, 15, 17. But again, if you look at 15B, that's where we at UC Riverside have an opportunity, right? Explained well. We really can't do a lot about whether it was planned well. It's a UC system change. And well, we know how that happens. And then whether it was executed well, specifically for UC Path, as it relates to us, sure, there may be things that we could have done there, but other UC system changes, we don't really have that role. So the one area I say we look at is how we are explaining it to our staff members here at UC Riverside. And again, that goes back to communications, but it also goes back to us being engaged in those changes. Sometimes we take the apathetic approach to say, it's a UC change, so why should I care? It's going to happen either way. And I think changing that mindset is one area, but this is UC change.
Yeah, right here, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Richard Rycroft, and I work in risk management. And my questions for the panel, it falls under the heading of organizational change. And under the survey, it indicated that there's areas for opportunities in the areas of planning, execution, and communication. And my question is, were there any meaningful comments given that would either indicate what was done wrong in the past, or any recommendations as to what we could do better moving forward?
Julie is looking at the comments.
What we see is, again, these are themes, not individual comments. So we got some comments that were provided to the campus as kind of illustrations, and they talk about just too much change, pendulum swinging with new leadership coming in with new initiatives, implementing change, changes not being prioritized or managed, a chaotic environment. So that's the kind of the flavor. There are maybe half a dozen comments, and I invite Julie to read some of the specifics if you.
So here's one, inadequate staffing to meet the campus infrastructure and growing number of faculty hires. Faculty are not always respectful of staff. Career tracks was not adequately implemented on this campus. The management positions on this campus are rated much lower than their counterparts doing the same job at other UC campuses. That's just one.
So that's one that hits all kinds of topics of change on the campus, to the question that was asked earlier about whether it was specific.
And I just want to comment on the opportunity that we have now. Like, we now understand that we have these deficiencies in explaining well what these new changes that are coming on the pipeline are to the campus. And I think it's a really good thing for us to take these lessons learned. And then as we go through the future polling, we measure ourselves against that, we can see, did we actually implement positive changes in that area so that we can explain things well, execute well, and implement well. So. I mean, I know it doesn't always sound great, but it's actually really good to get feedback like this, that's this blunt, that says, hey, you know what, this particular project was not done well at all. So then you can take a look at that project, not brandish the people who were on it, but say, hey guys, what did we do? What can we do to improve? Maybe even do some surveys about that.
If I can add just one comment as a specific sort of insight into that question of change management. When I see that statistical information, I don't see it saying we don't appreciate or agree with the change. The way in which it was explained and the way it felt that it came to us was difficult. And I see that paradox in the performance management information. Overall, as a category, people said, I see the value in the change. I see the improvement in the information we're able to gather. And Employee and Labor Relations, along with Human Resources, did a feedback session on the evaluation form from last year to see what worked and what didn't work. And some of the comments that were positive to that were, they enjoyed having the ability to define things clearer, to have a better conversation. They found it useful to be able to say an apple's an apple and an orange is an orange. What they found difficult was how they had to do it and how it was explained, because it was a lot of information in the midst of a lot of things. And so as using performance management as an example, we saw that as people appreciated aspects of the change, but what we asked them to do to get that useful information is something we need to be considerate of. And what burdens are we placing on them to do that? And I think that's something that as we look at making additional changes, and you have to change to continue to grow as an organization, we have to ask ourselves, what are we gaining from this? And how is this impact going to be mitigated over the course of time? Because in the long term, it's like losing weight. You appreciate the change, but it's hard in the process. And so how are we helping keep you motivated, keep you engaged, keep you going when it's one of those tough moments where you don't want to keep going? And so I think for us in our group with performance management, that's something we saw, is that we knew people valued it, but we needed to improve on it. And we've taken that information and made changes this year, which we'll be communicating shortly as part of our change management effort. So.
I think an example of a good change that's happened is the North District. So it was planned, there's a committee. It was kind of explained when we got to see the 3 different vendors. And I think staff appreciated, even though it's not the one we might have picked, but at least we were able to see the different vendors. And I think that was a good change.
We've got Crystal right up front, please, and then we'll go back there. I see Andrew. We got about a little under 10 minutes left, so if you could be terse in your questions, that would be very helpful.
Hi, my name is Crystal Petrini. I'm from UC Mexis, and I'm also the Director of Outreach for Staff Assembly. So my question is about actually performance management. And so we see that we've improved from the last survey, but we still have some work to be done. So my question to the group is, there's also a very big difference in how staff responded to that question versus how directors and senior leadership responded. So to mitigate that is our 360 performance evaluations maybe in our future where staff can also evaluate their supervisors on the work that's being done?
Good question, thank you. So let me preface my response by saying whichever organization you ask about performance management, you typically get much rosier responses at the top than the employees who are on the receiving end of it. So our results are consistent with what we would expect in terms of the distribution of it. One of the things that we are enormously proud of as a campus, and I just want to make sure that, I don't know if there are many people in the room who were involved in the UC Path implementation, but we had a spectacular UC Path implementation from a payroll perspective, and it took tons of people working incredibly hard to do that. So and it's relevant to performance management, and I'll tell you why. Because when the UC system purchased PeopleSoft, which is the system we're using now for payroll, we also purchased an electronic performance management tool. So as you know, right now we have paper evaluations and maybe we scan them and email them to each other, but fundamentally we're doing a paper process. We are ready and eager to implement ePerformance, which is the module that the electronic performance management module. We're waiting for the rest of the system to catch up with us so that we can jump onto that. And Lorena Velasquez is heading up our implementation for both that and a system that will replace iRecruit. And so once we go to ePerformance, then we'll have greater ability, practically speaking, to gather input. Now, there's still work being done on from a campus perspective, determining what does our new process look like, what should it look like, but we will have the capability in ways that we haven't had before when we're able to move forward. So I know it's only a partial response because we're still in the process of conversations with the campus about what our future state for performance management is going to be, and whether the extent to which it includes broader feedback. And we'll have systems that would allow us to make those kinds of changes much more easily than we could have done in the past. I want to say something else about 360s, though, and that's not quite in the context of performance management. It's that I think we think about them in that context, but the other context where they're incredibly useful is as a developmental tool. And one of the really encouraging things that I've seen this year, and I think many people know about it, is an interest in the part of senior leaders in getting that feedback. And several of our deans and vice provosts right now have been going through a process when they engaged in a 360 to get input from their staff outside of the context of performance management that would give them the kind of insight that would allow them to be more effective. And so I'm very excited to see the campus embracing the use of 360s to improve management effectiveness, whether it's in or out of the context of performance management. So more to come on this topic, but I'm really excited that we're going to have the capability, the systems capability, to really improve the way we do performance management over the next year or two.
Anybody else?
Just add one comment, and it is normal for most of us to fall into performance management and put it in the bucket of the performance evaluation process. Performance management, if you've taken the performance management certification, if you are an OD, organizational design kind of person, or organizational change kind of person, you understand that performance management is the way in which people feel they receive information, the way in which they feel they have instruction, direction, the way they feel that they are developed. That's all performance management. How you score that is, as the Chancellor mentioned, a report card. But it is not performance management. And I think everyone would agree that if you get a form at the end of the year and it's the only conversation you have on performance, it is not performance management. And so, you look at the survey questions and what they ask, and they don't focus solely on, did you use the right checkboxes? They ask, did your manager develop you? Did you have an opportunity to engage in honest conversation? Did you understand your role to the university? Did you understand what your job does? And if you look at those questions, we scored high in that. And we scored high in interpersonal conversations with our supervisors, which means, and explains to me why the paradox exists in performance management, is as a whole, those things that drive engagement and drive involvement and performance management, we're doing well. We've made improvements thanks to people like, our organizational design group. But the process, we're working on making that less a hindrance. And I think when you see these changes combined with some of these other things, you'll see improvements as well.
All right, Andrew, you're going to get the last question from the audience.
I'm Andrew Larrett-Smith. I'm the campus ombuds. And I had a question about something that Jadie's referenced a number of times, the role breakdown. I wonder if we could go back to that slide, because I thought that was...
Which one?
The role breakdown, I think it's slide 20-something.
I can tell you the number. It is 31.
31. So one of the, just looking at, I first had an interpretive question. Looking at this, as I understand it, individual contributors are scoring lower on average than the campus average, whereas directors and above are scoring, the individual contributors are scoring higher on average. So I had a question about, in comparing it, it looks like the campus average is higher than individual contributors, but lower. I'm sorry, I'm just confused. My sense is the individual contributors are actually giving higher scores, and campus leaders are giving lower scores. Is that correct?
No, it's the other way around.
No, it's the other way around.
Okay.
The red indicates lower. So as you're looking at that, the average right there that says Riverside, so for career development, it's 55 at UC Riverside. For an individual contributor, it would be 51, so -4.
Okay, because that was where I was confused, because in other comparators, it was comparing, like when compared to the UC system, if it was red, that was indicating that the campus was lower than the system. Is that reversed here, or is that?
So here, if you look at the top line, and I apologize because we wanted to be transparent and give you all the data, but then that makes it really difficult to read. So, but it's comparing to the 2017 campus score. So when you compare for career development, for example, individual contributors, they scored 4 points lower than the average campus score. So the score for the campus was 55, but for individual contributors, 51. And so forth across. And then for directors and above, in terms of career development, well, they got to be directors, so they're feeling 6 points ahead of the rest of us. So, but that's how you read it.
Okay. Because I think the color coding looks a little differently. I guess if there could be some clarity, I could just ask, but it just seemed like it was, the color coding was working in reverse as compared to other, because if you go to, for instance, well, maybe I can follow up later.
Yeah, we'll
and ask
have an offline conversation about that, make sure that it's clear.
It's actually online. The full body of this is online on the Staff Assembly website, so you can check it out there. Sorry, learn to talk. The full summary is on the Staff Assembly website. We will subsequently post Jadie's PowerPoint as well. So we're at the very end, but I want to throw one thing out there because I want people to see it, and then I'm going to throw one last question for a short answer. This is one of the most, to me personally, category breakdown years of service is one of the most interesting charts in this entire survey. And so as you look at it, you see the average number, first column, 55, the numbers are the same. The first column is 1 to 3 years of service. The second column, 3 to 5. The third column, 5 to 10. The fourth column, 10 to 15. You notice the pattern? And it kind of looks like, all right, 1 to 3, you're like, what's going on at this place? And if you survive 1 to 3 and you get to 5, you're like, all right, I got it, I'm okay. 5 to 10, you're like, oh, I could just get to 10 years. After 10, you're like, everything's great. 15, you're back to, I just got to get to 20 years. But watch this. Look at 30. They're bitter. But all kidding aside, it is a small sample size, I will acknowledge that. But here's my question, because as we were preparing for this presentation, I was going along the website, and they know where I'm going with this, but I was looking around on the UCR website, and there's a website here at UCR called morale.ucr.edu. And it is an amazing web archaeological find because it is virtually untouched since 2005. And I encourage you all at your leisure to go look at this. It was based on a survey well before these campus climate surveys, but based on a survey that talked about what was going on at UCR then. The idea was under Ray Orbach. There was a committee formed. Do we have any people? There were about 6 people left on campus who were on that committee. Anybody in the room? I know a few. Okay. So here's my question. When I looked at those documents, and I've shared them with the panel, some of the comments were virtually identical to the concerns we're seeing now, to the point, one of them being the survey, or the individuals surveyed were convinced that filling out the survey was not going to change anything. I love the fact we have so many faces in this room because all of you are invested, all of you care. So my question for the panel is, what are we going to do differently this time so that in 2035, your kid is not looking on our website at the 2018 results and saying, wow, they had the same problems back almost 20 years ago. Panel.
I know what we're trying to do different this year, Staff Assembly, Ross and myself and the board, is meeting with different groups, like Veronica from Lead, right? And then we just met with Louise, where is she? I just saw her, Louise yesterday. And Dylan Rodriguez, he just came in, we met with him. We met with the ASUCR president. So we're trying to just make relationships and just see, do you understand staff, faculty, do you understand this? Faculty, do you understand the staff? So those kind of things, we're trying to do that this year and hopefully keep going and just building relationships and understanding each other.
Anybody else? Done.
And from a central HR perspective, what we're trying to do is have you tell us what would be helpful rather than have us assume that we know the answers to how to fix this. And so what we're really trying to do is get as much feedback and input from the campus and from employees themselves into developing our plans for how we use this incredibly valuable information to make this the kind of workplace that we want to be part of. So that's what we're doing differently in HR.
Kim?
I think some of the things that we're engaged in with organizational excellence right now is just having these workshops where we take polls at the workshop to find out what you guys need, what the campus is looking for, what direction they want to go in terms of professional development. And over the last 2 years, we've really kind of done that with our OE workshops where we have these breakout sessions and everyone's writing things down. And so engagement and feedback, I think we've all said it today that you need to be engaged to be empowered. I think that's what Alex said, engagement equals empowerment. And I think just having the ability for us to have lunch and learn sessions like February, this guy, and more, and these type of events where we're really coming together and talking about these issues head on. I think change is universally not a fun thing to go through. I think, you know, we can get better at change. We're never going to be perfect at change. No one's going to have this system-wide implementation that was 100%, every single person on the campus was like, oh my God, that was the best thing I've ever done in my life. All the extra work, all that stuff. That won't happen. But I think as we begin to continue to take a look at that, do a lessons learned breakdown of these project implementations and really work at it, then I think we can find some ways to kind of increase our ability to manage that change for ourselves and, you know, even just our emotional part of that change, because there's a lot of that as well. But I think the more engaged we continue to be, I think HR's put out a lot of new professional development courses. I know OE's got the bronze certificate course out there, and we're really trying to teach ourselves how to collaborate better together, how to manage change, how to, you know, there's classes on lean forward with OE. So, I mean, there's a lot of professional development opportunities, and the more we work together to grow together, I think the more successful we'll be.
I apologize. If you work with me long enough, you know I get on my soapbox and a little philosophical. But I will say, you know, these courses, this engagement, what it does, in addition to gathering knowledge, because anyone can go to a course, read a book, get information, and walk away. The unspoken benefit of that is the relationship you build, because it's the community sharing of an idea and development that is the powerful part of that. People don't understand sometimes that change is opportunity and change is also adversity. What gets you through adversity is not standing alone and saying, I do it. It's knowing that you have people there with you doing it. And so absolutely take the courses, get engaged because you need to learn, but develop relationship with each other so that you don't get just siloed by your work. Because that's what gets you going. I mean, you look at surveys about why people stay in an organization. They enjoy the work, they enjoy the pay, but they enjoy the people. And when you look at the staff survey, you know, one of the things, there was a contrast that said the communication between orgs is not as great. The communication within my group is greater. And I think if we can take that kind of feeling amongst individuals and start spreading that across organizations, seeing it less as just transactional work, but more as a relationship, we'll start seeing things improve, just feeling better about things. So, off my philosophical soapbox.
Robert, you get the last word if you want it.
That's pretty scary. Your question was, what will change in 12 years? My answer is nothing. And I don't mean that to be negative. I mean that nothing will change unless we, as a community, as UCR, choose to change. And I think that echoes kind of what Alex said, and I think that, Alex, did I get that right? Aaron. But my point is that unless we choose to make that change as a community, as staff members, and it goes from everywhere from small to big, right? When you as a staff member get a digest, read it, right? I mean, that's part of the communication path. Once you read it, see if there's something you're going to do about it, right? If you see that there's a search committee that is going to be formed for a major position here on campus, and you're looking at that and you're going, there's no staff on that. Don't sit on that. Because nothing's going to change in 12 years unless we, the staff here at UCR, decide that each one of us as individuals decide to do something. I didn't stay on the staff assembly board for 6 years because I thought it'd be fun. It's been fun. But this is what change is about, is taking that individual decision to move forward.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank all the panel. Can I get a big round of applause for everybody? All right, so now, as Jadie said, we need your input. All right, this is your time to shine. We need to hear what you want to do, what you think we ought to do next. If you have a question or a comment that you want to submit, again, this address will stay open. You may do so at any time, and we will see it. And Whether it's something you specifically want us to do or act upon, we'll do what we can. If you want a specific response, please include your email address and we'll do our best to get back to you. Jadie.
I just want to add one more thing to that, and that is Chancellor Wilcox wanted to be with us for the entire session this morning, or I guess it's afternoon now, but he asked that we please, please, please follow up with him with feedback, with recommendations. And so when you submit your responses, just know that that's our plan, is to take what you tell us to campus leadership. And to the question about what's going to change, I think one of the things that's going to change is that we are going to continue this conversation with the Chancellor and with campus leadership. So this is not a one-off session. This is the beginning of the conversation about the change.
Perfect. All right, you got about 15 minutes. Go to it.